K Clock Ryan may stop in.
Oh, good. Hey. Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone, and I'm joined by my good friend, Dolores Piers, who's the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. Hi, Dee. How are you?
Alrighty, how you doing tonight, Joe?
I'm doing just fine. Thank you, Dee. Our topic for tonight is on the balance of power in West Asia. And we have two pieces to help along our discussion. One piece deals with the activities of Israel, in Syria. Okay, and the other is a part of a video from Danny Haifong, who in this part of that particular video is interviewing Scott Ritter. It's a very long video. It's 3 hours and 6 minutes. He had a long conversation with Pepe Escobar, and then he had a much longer conversation with Scott Ritter. We're concerned with the last 14 to 15 minutes of his conversation with Scott Ritter. And that conversation is important for highlighting some of the issues concerning the balance of power, in West Asia. So we're going to start off right now. I guess I should start off, Dee.
Yes, I'm sharing the show around.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to start off then with the article concerning the Israeli activities in Syria. And I'll share the screen. I picked this up in UN's review. And this is a fairly lengthy article from Jonathan Cook on December 19th, 2024. And the headline on it is Israel, not the liberators, quote unquote, of Damascus, will decide Syria's fate. And here's a photo. The caption says, Syria's, oh, Bonnie's telling me my hat needs to be adjusted somewhat. Syria's future under Al-Qaeda's spin-off HTS will come in two flavors only. Either submit and collude like the West Bank, or end up wrecked like Gaza. I'm not sure those are the only two alternatives, but in his view, those are the only two flavors. So we'll go through why he thinks that is true, and we'll state our disagreements. There's been a flurry of, quote, what next for Syria articles in the wake of dictator Bashar al-Assad's hurried exit from Syria and the takeover of much of the country by Al-Qaeda's rebranded local forces. Western governments and media have been quick to celebrate the success of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, even though the group is designated a terrorist organization in the United States, Britain, and much of Europe. Back in 2013, the United States even placed a £10 million bounty. I think that's the sign for pound, on its leader Abu Muhammad al-Julani for his involvement with Al Qaeda and Islamic State, ISIS, and for carrying out a series of brutal attacks on civilians. Once upon a time, he might have expected to end up in an orange jumpsuit in the notorious off-the-grid detention and torture facility run by the Americans at Guantanamo Bay. Now he's positioning himself as Syria's heir apparent, seemingly with Washington's blessing. Excuse me. Surprisingly, before either HTS or al-Julani can be tested in their new roles overseeing Syria, the West is hurrying to rehabilitate them. The US and UK are both moving to overturn HTS's status as a proscribed organization. To put the extraordinary speed of this absolution in perspective, recall that Nelson Mandela, feted internationally for helping to liberate South Africa from apartheid rule, was removed from Washington's terrorist watch list only in 2008, 18 years after his release from prison. God, that's an incredible fact. Similarly, Western media are helping al-Julani to rebrand himself as a statesman in the making, airbrushing his past atrocities by transitioning from using his nom de guerre, which is al-Julani, of course, to his birth name, Ahmed, al-Shara, piling on pressure. Stories of prisoners being freed from Assad's dungeons and of families pouring onto the streets in celebration have helped to drive an upbeat news agenda, an obscure, more likely dismal future for newly, quote, liberated, unquote, Syria, as the US, UK, Israel, Turkey, and Gulf states jostle for a share of the pie. Syria's status looks sealed as a permanently failed state. As we shall see later in the program, I think that's contingent on a certain thing not happening. Israel's bombing raids, destroying hundreds of critical infrastructure sites across Syria, are designed precisely towards that end. Within days, the Israeli military was boasting it had destroyed 80% of Syria's military installations. More have gone since. On Monday, Israel unleashed 16 strikes on Tartus, a strategically important port where Russia has a naval fleet. The blast was so powerful they registered 3.5 on the Richter scale. During Assad's rule, Israel chiefly rationalized its attacks on Syria, coordinating them with Russian forces supporting Damascus as necessary to prevent the flow of weapons overland from Iran to its Lebanese ally, Hezbollah. But that is not the goal currently. HTS's Sunni fighters have vowed to keep Iran and Hezbollah, the Shiite, quote, axis of resistance, unquote, against Israel, out of Syrian territory. Israel has prioritized instead targeting Syria's already beleaguered its military. Its planes, naval ships, radars, anti-aircraft batteries, and missile stockpiles to strip the country of any offensive or defensive capability. Any hope of Syria maintaining a semblance of sovereignty is crumbling before our eyes. These latest strikes come on top of years of Western efforts to undermine Syria's integrity and economy. The U.S. military controls Syria's oil and wheat production areas, plundering these key resources with the help of a Kurdish minority. More generally, the West has imposed punitive sanctions on Syria's economy. It was precisely these pressures that hollowed out Assad's government and led to its collapse. Now Israel is piling on more pressure to make sure any newcomer faces an even harder task. And here's a map. The Syrian opposition, led by HTS, is in nearly red color. I guess it's a reddish brown. A very light gold is the unidentified opposition groups. A lavender color is the Kurdish-led forces. A light yellow color is Turkish-backed Syrian rebels and Turkish military. A lighter lavender color is the Al-Tanif deconfliction zone. And the blue color is a contested area. So now we get into the map, and you see the area not at Aleppo, but next to Aleppo to the north west is a Turkish-controlled area. Then there is a very large lavender area, the darker of the two areas in lavender, and that is the area dominated by the Kurdish people, but there are a lot of other groups in that area as well. Then there's another yellow area, light yellow, which is another area of Turkish incursion. Then we have the red-brown area encompassing the cities of Aleppo, Hama, also Latakia, a city of Homs. These are the cities where most of the population of Syria lives, going all the way down to Damascus. The white areas are not coded on the map, so I'm not sure what they represent. I would think these are the contested areas, but there are some areas up here. I guess those aren't sufficiently blue to be the contested color, but right at the bottom of the map, there's the Golan Heights, right here, a small area. Those are, that's certainly contested. The white area here is also part of the Golan Heights, that's contested. I don't know if these other white areas are contested, or not. The light brown areas around Bedarah, those are the unidentified opposition groups. And then there's another lavender area, I guess not quite as dark. Which is the Al-Tanif deconfliction zone. But there's a U.S. outpost as well. And there are U.S. troops that are in the other lavender area as well, because that's where the oil is. and the U.S. is currently purloining the Syrian oil. I guess the U.S. is giving it to the Kurds, who then are selling it to the Israelis at a cut rate price. So that oil is ending up in Israel, that Iraqi oil. Now, this map was as of the 12th of December at 19 hours GMT, okay, or Greenwich Mean Time. Going on with the article, maps of post-Assad Syria, like those during the latter part of his beleaguered presidency, are a patchwork of different colors, with Turkey and its local allies seizing territory in the north, the Kurds clinging on to the east, U.S. forces in the south, and the Israeli military encroaching from the west. You cannot see the areas of encroachment of the Israelis, but they're in the light blue area up here, around the Golan Heights. But the Israelis went further in towards this white area. I mean, this is the Quneitra area, and the Israelis are getting very, very close to Damascus at this point, which, however, is being run by the opposition groups, basically governed by HTS. So Syria is split right now, being run by a number of competing forces. The article says this is the proper context for answering the question of what comes next. There are two possible fates, according to Jonathan Cook. Syria is now the plaything of a complex of vaguely aligned state interests. None have Syria's interests as a strong, unified state high on their list. In such circumstances, Israel's priority will be to promote sectarian divisions and stop a central authority from emerging to replace Assad. This, of course, is undoubtedly correct. This has been Israel's plan stretching back decades, and has shaped the thinking of the dominant foreign policy elite in Washington since the rise of the so-called neocons, or neoconservatives, under President George W. Bush in the early 2000s. The aim has been to balkanize any state in the Middle East that refuses to submit to Israeli and U.S. hegemony. Israel cares only that Syria is riven by internal feuding and power plays. Beginning in 2013, Israel ran a covert program to arm and fund at least 12 different rebel factions, according to a 2018 article that appeared in Foreign Policy magazine. There's a link to that article in this piece. In this regard, Syria's fate is being modeled on that of the Palestinians. There may be a choice, but it will come in no more than two flavors. Syria can become the West Bank, or it can become Gaza. Oh, God. So far, the indications are that Israel is gunning for the Gaza option. Washington and Europe appear to prefer the West Bank route, which is why they have been focusing on the rehabilitation of HTS. I wonder where Turkey fits into this analysis. I think that Turkey also prefers the West Bank route. In the Gaza scenario, Israel keeps pounding Syria, depriving the rebranded Al-Qaeda faction or any other group of the ability to run the country's affairs. Instability and chaos reign, with Assad's legacy of secular rule destroyed. Bitter sectarian rivalries dominate, cementing Syria into separate regions. Feuding warlords, crime families, and um, um, but so, uh, I mean, really random uh, 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 militias battle it out for local dominance. Their attention is directed inwards towards strengthening their rule against rivals, not outwards towards Israel. And back to the Stone Age, there would be nothing new about this outcome for Syria in the worldview shared by Israel and the neocons. It draws on lessons Israel believes it learned in both Gaza and Lebanon. Israeli generals spoke of returning Gaza, quote, to the Stone Age, unquote, long before they were in position to realize that goal with the current genocide there. Those same generals first tested their ideas on a more limited scale in Lebanon, pummeling the country's infrastructure under the so-called, quote, Dahia, unquote, doctrine. Israel believed such indiscriminate wrecking sprees offered a double benefit. Overwhelming destruction forced the local population to concentrate on basic survival rather than organized resistance. And longer term, the targeted population would understand that given the severity of the punishment, any future resistance to Israel should be avoided at all costs. Back in 2007, before the uprising in Syria erupted, the leading articulator of the neocon agenda, Caroline Glick, a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, she's an American Jew, by the way, who migrated, to Israel and is highly nationalist and Israeli supremacist, in character. It is very hard to listen to her when you go to her streams, uh, which I've done a few times. Uh, I guess when I'm sort of in a mood of quickly becoming nauseous. Anyway, uh, Caroline Glick, a columnist for the Jerusalem Post, set out Syria's imminent fate. She explained that any central authority in Damascus had to be destroyed. Yeah, that's Caroline, all right. The reasoning, quote, centralized governments throughout the Arab world are the primary fulminators of Arab hatred of Israel, unquote. She added, how well would Syria contend with the IDF if it was simultaneously trying to put down a popular rebellion, unquote. Or better still, Syria could be turned into another failed state like Libya after Gaddafi's ousting and killing in 2011 with the help of NATO. But Libya has been run by warlords ever since. Notably, both Syria and Libya, along with Iraq, Somalia, Sudan, also Lebanon and Iran, were on a hit list drawn up in Washington in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 by U.S. officials close to Israel. All but Iran are now failed or failing states. Security contractor. The other possible outcome is that Syria becomes a larger version of the West Bank. In that scenario, HTS and al Julani are able to convince the US and Europe that they are so supine, so ready to do whatever they are told, that Israel has nothing to fear from them. Their rule would be modeled on that of Mahmoud Abbas, a good model for those who want to get rich, since Abbas is a millionaire a number of times over, a billionaire a number of times over these days. He's the leader of the much reviled Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. His power is a little greater than those of the head of him, of a municipal council, overseeing schools and collecting the rubbish. His security forces are lightly armed, effectively a police force used for internal repression, and incapable of challenging Israel's illegal occupation. He has described as, quote, sacred, unquote, his service to Israel in preventing Palestinians from resisting their decades-long oppression. The Palestinian Authority's active collusion was on show again at the weekend when its security forces killed a resistance leader in Jenin who was wanted by Israel. Al-Julani could similarly be cultivated as a security contractor. Largely thanks to Israel, Syria now has no army, navy, or air force. It has only lightly armed factions such as HTS, other rebel militias like the misnamed Syrian National Army, and Kurdish groups. Under CIA and Turkish tutelage, HTS could be strengthened, but only enough to repress dissent in Syria. HTS would have powers, but on license. Its survival would depend on keeping things quiet for Israel, both through a reign of intimidation against other Syrian groups, including the Palestinian refugee population who threatened to fight Israel, and by keeping out other regional actors resisting Israel, such as Iran and Hezbollah. And as with Abbas, al-Julani's rule in Syria would be territorially limited. The Palestinian leader has to contend with the fact that large swaths of the West Bank have been carved out as Jewish settlements under Israeli rule, and that he has no access to critical resources, including aquifers, agricultural land, and quarries. Off limits to HTS would likely be Kurdish areas policed by Turkey and the United States, where much of the country's oil is located, as well as a swath of territory in Syria's southwest that Israel has invaded over the past 2 weeks. It is widely assumed Israel will annex these Syrian lands to extend its illegal occupation of the Golan, which it took from Syria in 1967. Quote, love, unquote, for Israel. Al-Julani understands only too well the options ahead of him. Perhaps not surprisingly, he appears far keener to become a Syrian Abbas than a Syrian Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader killed by Israel in October. And there's a video link to a video of the killing of Yahya Sinwar. Given his clean-cut makeover, al-Julani may imagine that he can eventually upgrade himself to the Syrian equivalent of the U.S.-backed leader of Ukraine, Zelensky. However, Zelensky's role has been to fight a proxy war against Russia on behalf of NATO. Israel would never countenance a leader of a country on its border being given that kind of military muscle. Al-Julani's commanders have lost no time explaining that they have no beef with Israel and do not want to provoke hostilities with it. The heady first days of HTS's rule were marked by its leaders thanking Israel for helping it to take Syria by neutralizing Iran and Hezbollah in Lebanon. There were even declarations of love, unquote, quote unquote, for Israel. Such sentiments have not been dented by the Israeli army invading the large demilitarized zone inside Syria next to the Golan in violation of a 1974 armistice agreement. Nor have they been damaged by Israel's relentless bombing of Syria's infrastructure, a violation of sovereignty that the Nuremberg Tribunal at the end of the Second World War decried as the supreme international crime. This week, al-Julani meekly suggested that Israel had secured its interests in Syria through airstrikes and invasion and could now leave the country in peace. Quote, we do not want any conflict, whether with Israel or anyone else, and we will not let Syria be used as a launch pad for attacks against Israel, he said to the London Times. A Channel 4 reporter who tried last week to press an HTS spokesman into addressing Israel attacks on Syria was startled by the response. Obeda, I guess it's Arnaut, um, Arnaut, sounded as though he was following a carefully rehearsed script, reassuring Washington and Israeli officials that ATS had no bigger ambitions than emptying the bins on a regular basis. And there's this tweet from Dropsite News. Yeah, it's from X. Yeah, so it's a tweet. It's an X. HTS spokesman Obeda Arnaut is asked by Channel 4 News about Israel strikes on over 300 sites in Syria. Latest update, 480 strikes. He refused to denounce Israel's massive airstrikes and ground incursions. When pressed, he ordered vague general comments. I'm not going to play that video. Asked how HTS viewed the attacks on its sovereignty by Israel, Arnaut would only reply, quote, our priority is to restore security and services, revive civilian life and institutions, and care for newly liberated Syrians. There are many urgent parts of day-to-day life to restore: bakeries, electricity, water, communications. So our priority is to provide those services to the people, unquote. It seems HTS is even unwilling even to offer rhetorical opposition to Israeli war crimes on Syrian soil. Wider ambitions. All of this leaves Israel in a strong position to entrench its gains and widen its regional ambitions. Israel has announced plans to double the number of Jewish settlers living illegally on occupied Syrian territory in the Golan. Meanwhile, Syrian communities newly under Israeli rule in areas Israel has invaded since Assad's fall have appealed to their nominal government in Damascus and other Arab states to persuade Israel to withdraw. With good reason, they fear they face permanent occupation. Predictably, the same Western elites so incensed by Russia's violations of Ukraine's territorial integrity, they have spent 3 years arming Kyiv in a proxy war against Moscow, risking a potential nuclear confrontation, have raised not a peep of concern at Israel's ever-deepening violations of Syria's territorial integrity. Well, welcome once more to the rampant hypocrisy in international relations. Once again, it is one rule for Israel, another for anyone Washington views as an enemy. With Syria's air defenses out of the way, Israel now has a free run to Iran, either by itself or with U.S. assistance, to attack the last target on the neocon 7-country hit list from 2001. The Israeli media have excitedly reported on preparations for a strike, while the transition team working for incoming U.S. President Donald Trump are said to be seriously considering joining such an operation. And to top it all, Israel looks like it may finally be in sight of signing off, unquote, normal, unquote, relations with Washington's other major client state in the region, Saudi Arabia, a drive that had to be put on hold following Israel's genocide in Gaza. Renewed ties between Israel and Riyadh are possible again, in large part because coverage of Syria has further disappeared the Gaza genocide from the West's news agenda, despite Palestinians there, starved and bombed by Israel for 14 months, likely dying in larger numbers than ever. The narrative of the liberation of Syria, liberation quote unquote, currently dominates Western coverage. But so far, the takeover of Damascus by HTS appears only to have liberated Israel, leaving it freer to bully and terrorize its neighbors into submission. And that's it. I do want to add something from this map here, in addition to the comments Kay have already made. But Okay, if you look at Lebanon here, in the south, okay, of Lebanon, okay, with the Golan Heights here, in the south of Lebanon, there's a conflict, of course, between the Israelis and Hezbollah. And this is the area of the conflict, okay, down here. Okay. The Golan Heights, of course, are up here. Okay. So Israel thus far has been able to attack Lebanon, other than from the air, but its ground attacks have been limited to this particular area. So there's a situation where the ground forces of Lebanon, Hezbollah actually, are able to defend within a small area, which they have tunneled out and armed for years and years and years. And when the Israelis come into this area, they're shellacked by Hezbollah. But as a result of what's gone on in Syria, the Israelis now have forces, okay, in this area. If those forces are allowed to stay in that area and to consolidate, what's likely to happen is that the Israelis will try to attack Hamas on two fronts, on this front here, okay, and that front here. I should say Hezbollah, not Hamas. Okay, here, okay, and here. Okay, and if that happens, Hezbollah would be at a grievous disadvantage compared to the situation right now, because I don't believe they've tunneled out this area here. I don't believe they're prepared to defend against the Israelis here, and I don't think the Lebanese army is very much going to help them. So this means that as a result of the changes in Syria, that the area of Lebanon is in much greater jeopardy than it was before. Okay, okay, that's a new development. Also, Israeli forces are here in the Daraa area, okay, as well. So there's a possible two-front war coming up for Hezbollah as a result of what's happened, okay, in Syria, possibly further weakening the axis. That's something to really be concerned about. Okay. Iran says, of course, that it will find alternative paths to resupply Hezbollah. But those paths are going to have to go through what we've been calling the opposition areas, the HTS area. So Iran, if it wants to resupply Hezbollah, is probably going to have to bribe HTS in order to get the shipments actually through. It could be that Iran can find a way. It may, however, be very difficult. Okay, so before I left the article, I wanted to make that point. The other point I want to make is that how can the fate of Syria, outlined so clearly here by Jonathan Cook, how can those two possible fates actually be avoided or actually changed? What could happen now to stop that? According to Jonathan Cook's article, there's nothing that can be done to stop that. Uh, and we'll see as we go further into the stream that uh, there may be a way, but nobody is talking about it now. And so that's what the rest of our stream is going to be concerned with. So, D, any comments?
Hello.
Hello. Do you have any
I got
comments?
my oh, okay, I gotta get my sound up.
Okay, your sound seems fine.
It's hard to say when it comes with with this issue. Can you hear me?
I can hear you well.
Hello?
You're coming through loud and clear.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Uh-oh.
Okay. Uh, I'm gonna tell D her sound is good.
Hello?
D,
Yeah, yeah.
your sound is good.
Oh, it is good. Okay. I just wanted to make sure my sound was good.
Okay,
Okay.
your sound is good.
Yeah, each day when I hear what's going on, it's hard to say, um, especially when you look at Syria, because there are so many elements, there are so many different groups. You have on one hand, um, the group that took control. They're saying things are going to be peaceful. They're going to recognize everybody's rights. There's going to be secularism, and then on the other hand, half you're seeing reports of beheadings. You're seeing reports of so many different things. You know, not wanting women to walk around without their head covered. So there's so many different groups in there that what is the real? What is really going to happen there? We don't know. And when he talks to the US and he talks to Israel, what he says, and maybe he could honestly feel a certain way. You don't know that. If he says he wants to, be as he says, there are so many different factions in there.
There are so many different factions in there, indeed.
So you don't know. And then when it comes to
Okay,
where Iran is concerned, we don't know.
but the idea that there are so many different factions in there actually means that uh, that supports actually Jonathan Cook's case because Syria is so divided that it's very hard for the Syrians to come together and support a central government. Okay, so it looks like uh, um, either we are going to have a West Bank situation or we're going to have a Gaza situation.
It's it really is a very frightening situation there, I have to say. I was going to say horrific, but it is horrifying because you have the different religions, and then it's just like, and how extreme some of them could get. And we see that in Israel. You
Yeah,
have the seculars, and then you get to the way, way, way extreme.
yes,
And you have, we saw reports with where the Christians are concerned, and people that really don't have any religion, how they're being treated. I mean, it's just some just want to kill them, some just want to enslave them, sell them, the wives as slaves, and But these are all different groups. It's not like the whole state wants it. You know what I'm saying? You see smaller groups doing these actions. So it's just complete chaos in there.
Yes, I completely agree. And so does Jonathan Cook.
Hmm.
The question is, what has to be done to give things a chance to come together? In other words, what can be done uh, to create more favorable conditions for a central government to actually emerge out of the chaos?
Well, you know something? I think the West prefers the chaos.
I agree, the West prefers the chaos and Israel prefers the chaos. And right now, Turkey prefers the chaos too,
Hmm.
because I think the Turks want to detach the northeastern and northwestern areas, and they want to dominate those areas. Of course, they'd have to kill the Kurds or subdue them anyway.
And they
But
have every intention of doing that.
they have every intention of doing that. Right. Okay. So it looks like uh, uh, the chaos in Syria will continue, and every time a new group arises, they'll be bombed out of existence by Israel, by the Israeli Air Force.
Hmm.
That looks like the situation there going forward.
And the UN, not that anybody listens to the UN, but the UN has said that Israel's, got to comply with international law. Israel, has to respect the sovereignty of Syria. And they just can't randomly just, you know, bomb away inside Israel.
Yes, that's right. But there's the old saying concerning the Pope. How many divisions does the Pope have?
Yeah.
How many divisions does the United Nations have? It comes down to that.
Mhm.
The United Nations has small peacekeeping forces, okay, and no divisions and no air force.
Right.
So there's very little, the United Nations can do to enforce international law. Only nations can enforce international law if nations choose to do so. And so far, there are very few nations or national groups that are choosing to do so. Uh,
Right. When it comes to international law, for example, with the ICC, oh yeah, they were when the case was brought up against Putin, all of a sudden the U.S. is all in on it. But then when we look at the war crimes and everything Israel's doing, all of a sudden there's this complete opposite attitude.
that's right. There's this complete opposite attitude. So we have this very undesirable situation, and we have the question, how can it possibly change? Let's consider that question, and let's go back to the comments for a while, or go to the comments for the first time, and see what everybody has to say.
Okay.
And after that, we'll move on to the excerpt, okay, from the video. Oh, here's Friar Steve.
Yes, we haven't seen him in a while.
The rebels have liberated Damascus. You have to have that, liberated in quotes, Friar Steve. Syria is free. Bullshit, Friar Steve. Have you ever heard the expression uh, that anarchy is not freedom? That expression fully applies to Syria. Syria is divided into contending groups. There is no central government. So Syria is not free. It is subject to other governments and is scheduled to become the slaves of those governments. Friar Steve says that Assad ran away. He did run away. And Friar Steve mentions Hayat. Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, indeed. Fryer says they took a 10 million bounty off him last week. Oh, I was not aware of that. I hadn't heard they had taken it off him.
Yes, I heard that too. They took it off him. They were debating it, then they just finally concluded it.
Okay, so they then committed the ultimate hypocrisy, right? So Lana says, Happy Saturday. Friar Steve says, the less future bloodshed, the better for the people of Syria. True.
But
But of
did,
course, there's going to be a lot more bloodshed because the Turks are going to try to kill the Kurds now because they're going to have access to the Kurds. The Israelis will be trying to wipe out any of the groups in Syria that stands against them, uh, as will HTS, because HTS will be fighting for its areas, of Syria, and wiping out all opposition to them inside of that area.
and then you have the other factions that are religious extremists.
All right, and they are already wiping out Christians in Syria as we speak,
Yes, they are.
of course. Steve Vorprant says, hello, everybody. Hello, Steve. Friar Steve said the Kurds have a right to their sovereignty. They have earned it. They do have a right to their sovereignty. There's no question about that. But it's one thing to have a right to something, and it's another thing to be able to get it. Now, right now, the Kurds in Syria have a certain degree of autonomy because they're collaborating with the United States and because they have control of a certain area. But of course, the Turks are about to have a war with them in order to try, if I know the Kurds, if I know the Turks, in order to try to exterminate them.
And they want to get rid of the Kurds also that are in Iraq as well. The Turks have a problem with that.
Oh, yes, not only that, but the Turks would like to have the area around Kirkuk and Mosul because those used to be Turkey. And Turkey thinks they still should be Turkey. And Turkey thinks the city of Aleppo is Turkey. And they're going to try to annex, the city of Aleppo. So, Friar Steve, don't talk to me about Syria is free. Syria is not free. Syria is conquered by anarchy right now.
But the
And
U.S.
what
media, the U.S. media sells something else.
yeah, the U.S. media is full of bullshit as usual. Lana Dell says, how are you, Steve? And Steve says, hi, Lana. I'm okay, thanks. Evelina says, hi, all. Evelina says, why did the U.S. back Kurds free ISIS prisoners? Hmm. I didn't know they did free ISIS prisoners. Who said they did free ISIS prisoners?
I mean, ISIS prisoners were freed, but you know,
Right, but I don't know that it was the Kurds who freed them. Generally speaking, the Kurds have been imprisoning ISIS prisoners. If they freed them, they must have had some kind of reason for doing so. But it would be a shame if they only had to fight them again and put them in prison once more. Kay Ryan is here. Hi, Kay. Long time no see, Kay says. Yes, long time no see. Evelina says, why did the U.S. back Kurds free ISIS prisoners? 200 or 2,000, can't remember which. The Kurds were autonomous under Assad, last I heard. Yeah, they were autonomous, and they were joining with the United States to steal the oil and wheat of Syria, which was not a happy thing for Assad. It was very detrimental to the government, of Syria. Jeff Denton says, Happy Christmas. Indeed, Jeff, Happy Christmas to you. Ron says, Guess you all aren't speaking to me, so bye. We're
who?
not speaking to you. Of course, we're speaking to you. We just didn't have a chance to handle the comments yet, Gay. And Evelina says, Abbas, a billionaire, flabbergasted. Yeah, it's well known he's a billionaire. Friar Steve says, Kurds were oppressed under Assad. Steve says, hi, Kay. Steve Wolfbrand says, hi, Jeffrey. Evelina says, Al Golani looks like Zell's twin. I don't know who Zell is, but I think you're talking about Al Jolani, right? Rather than Al Golani. There is an Al Golani, but there's also Al Jolani. And Lana says, K. And Lana grins. And Lana says, I just saw this on LinkedIn report. Netanyahu won't attend Auschwitz liberation anniversary event, fearing arrest in Poland, 20th of December 2024, 11:42 a.m. Amazing. Lana says, I think the diverse society also shows Assad was tolerant. He was very tolerant of, different ethnic groups, but he was very intolerant of the political diversity. When it came to ethnic diversity, he was good. But you couldn't express any political opposition to him and get away with it. Friar Steve says the UN can create charters for UN force to uphold. UN forces keep peace worldwide with support of its members. They're very unsuccessful in keeping peace in controversial situations. For example, the UNIFIL group between uh, Lebanon and Israel has had a very difficult time keeping the peace there. It's been impossible for them to do it. The Israelis always just roll over them. Sometimes the Israelis shoot at them. Lana says Kay is way too easily offended. Well, indeed, we didn't do anything to offend her. We were happy she was here. Oh, Evelina says Jolani is Golani in Arabic. Oh, thank you, Evelina. Zelensky, yeah, Zelensky. Assad's prisons show how tolerant he was. Well, as I said, he was politically intolerant, but he was ethnically tolerant. Lana says, okay, thanks for the clarification, re Assad being tolerant. Okay, so let us now get to the second piece we have on the balance of power, okay, in West Asia. As far as that balance of power goes, we see in Syria that the balance currently appears to belong to the Turks, the United States, okay, and the Israelis. There is no independent Syria to now help to create a balance of power that is reasonably stable inside, okay, of West Asia, especially when we consider the objective of the Israelis, which is to establish a greater Israel stretching from the Nile to the Euphrates. Because of what happened in Syria these days, they are now much closer to that particular ambition. So let me now go to the second of our pieces tonight, which is, it's a video of Danny Haifang's recent conversations with Pepe Escobar and Scott Ritter. Okay, the title of the video is Pepe Escobar and Scott Ritter, Putin readies war with NATO as Russia strikes Kiev, Syria, okay, in chaos. We are very concerned with the Syria in chaos part of it, and particularly with just a piece of the clip where Scott Ritter is answering questions that are read out, by Danny Hyphon. So I'm starting at 2 hours, 46 minutes, and 25 seconds in. And basically, Scott is going to entertain two questions over the next roughly, I guess, over the next 14 or 15 minutes of this clip. Uh, so here we go. I guess I'm now sharing the clip, so you should be seeing it now in just a minute.
Yes, we see it.
You have nuclear sites, the U.S. would nuke Iran. Is that far fetched considering ramifications?
Worst breakfast for your waistline.
Oatmeal's healthy, right?
There's nothing good in oatmeal. Most oats cross-react with gluten, and almost all.
That always happens when you want to play a clip. Excuse the buffering also, it will come in just a minute.
Inside of their countries, live in their countries, determine their own fate, often gets lost in moments like these where we just constantly hear of, well, which side, which force, which outside force, which country that has some vested interest in a place like Syria, what can they do? And that's what we have been hearing for so long with Syria. And it's just, of course, with Syria's fall, it's come up to such a tense degree. But I'm just going to pull up one question, guys. Sorry. I'm going to pull up the super chats as Scott answers them because we are running a bit late. So I'm just going to ask you this from Dan. He said, question for Scott. You recently said if Iran doesn't give up nuclear sites, the U.S. would nuke Iran. Is that far-fetched considering ramifications?
Dan, I'd ask you to go back and re-examine what I said. Let me be very specific about what I said. I said that Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. Can we agree on that? I just want to start with points of agreement. Now, I know I can't see you nodding your head, yes, but I'm going to assume that you're nodding your head, yes. Donald Trump withdrew from the JCPOA. All right. Donald Trump said that JCPOA is a bad deal because it led down a path where it would eventually, because of the expiration of the sunset clauses, acquire capabilities such in enrichment that could be used to make a nuclear weapon. Even if Iran didn't want a nuclear weapon, the capabilities would be there. Can we nod our head yes on that? Please tell me you're nodding your head yes, because it's a statement of fact. He's also said that he will not allow Iran to develop a nuclear weapon at all. Zero tolerance for it. And is your head nodding? I'm assuming it is. I'm being a dick right now.
Okay, I just want to comment on that. Trump did say that, but he said that when he last was president. That was 4 years ago. As Scott will indicate himself, the situation has changed since 4 years ago. The balance of power in the world has changed since 4 years ago. That might have an impact on Trump's intentions. Let us go forward. Okay, you have any comments on that, Dee?
No.
Okay. So,
Because I'm not picking on this guy, but I don't simply say stupid little short sentences. Danny rightfully mocked me for my loquacious answers, but one of the reasons why I do the loquacious answers is because these problems are very complex, and there's a lot of facets and nuances in there that I barely touch upon when I answer these questions. But I'm familiar with the vast majority because I actually spend my entire freaking life studying this stuff, especially issues like nuclear weapons and Iran's nuclear program. So now Trump says you'll never happen, but Trump's not the kind of guy just to say something. He turned around and two things. He had a nuclear posture.
I have to comment there. Trump is often the guy who says things and doesn't actually follow through on those things. So I have to disagree with Scott there. In fact, I think in some ways, Scott will in a minute disagree with himself, but let's go on.
Review where he continued the policy of and that America will use nuclear weapons preemptively when required, meaning we're not going to wait for someone to nuke us. If we see a problem out there, bam, preemptive. That's his.
That's absolutely true. That was Trump's policy. Absolutely true. And when he comes in, it still may be his policy. But of course, when he comes in, he's going to quickly talk with Putin. And maybe that will have an impact on what his policy is going to be when it comes to nuclear war.
And I had heard someone say that when it comes to foreign policy, there are people that aren't to be trusted that Trump is hearing stuff from, and he's not
Yes.
getting accurate information.
Oh, yes. And I completely agree with that. And I also agree that the people who he's been designating to serve him in the foreign policy area are not only people who will give him false information, but they are people, for the most part, who will support the policy of preemption, in the nuclear area. So there is that too. There's definitely a tendency for him to continue the policy that he instituted in his administration. I mean, I certainly readily admit that. I kind of expect that from him. I'm just saying that it's not really determined yet because he still has to have those talks, okay, with Putin.
Yes, he does. And I just want to say hello, Lisa Theobald is here.
Hey, Lisa, how you doing? And so we don't know what impact his talks with Putin are going to have, but we can be sure that Putin is going to lay out reality for Trump. And there can be a number of dimensions in that particular reality, not only concerning Ukraine and the situation in Europe, but also the situation, okay, in West Asia,
Hmm.
because Putin has commitments, okay, in West Asia. He, of course, was giving up his commitments in Syria because of the way Assad was managing things and the absolute bankruptcy. I'm not talking about in the financial sense, though it was pretty bad financially too. Okay, but the political bankruptcy of the Syrian state. So I think he kind of withdrew his support uh, uh, um, uh, 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 for that reason. But his relationship with Iran is completely different. There are developing commitments that are very deep. Those two are very close to a formal alliance, and that formal, comprehensive, alliance, including military matters,
Hmm.
is scheduled to be concluded 5 days after Trump takes office on January 25th. So I think already Putin has a commitment. It may not be quite on paper yet, but from his point of view, I think he's going to have a moral commitment, to Iran, including doing whatever he can to defend Iran. And I'm sure when he has a talk with Trump, he's going to lay out that aspect of Russian foreign policy and how important it is to Russia and how serious the Russian commitments are to Iran. And he's probably likely to outline also how serious the Chinese commitments are to Iran as well. Both of those superpowers have commitments to Iran, and both of those nations are substantially stronger than they were when Trump last was president. And he's going to have to confront that particular reality. I think the talks with Putin are going to present him with that kind of a reality. And he has a tendency to trust Putin more than he has to trust his own advisors. he showed that tendency in his first presidency. So let us keep all that in mind as we go forward here.
His guidance. He's the president of the United States back then. He says, prepare for preemptive strike. And then he turns around and gets an employment plan. That means how we're going to use the weapons that is focused almost singularly on the issue of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. I'm not making this up. The nuclear employment plan talked about B-61 bombs, the gravity bombs delivered by B-2 bombers, and W-76-2 low-yield nuclear weapons that come in to penetrate the underground sites to take out Iran's nuclear capability if Iran decided it was going to move down the path towards nuclear weapons. Now, Donald Trump left, Joe Biden came in. The deteriorating situation that's taken place over the region has put Iran on the cusp of being a nuclear power. Not me saying it, everybody's in agreement that Iran, instead of being a year away from breakout, is days away. That is, that the political decision is made in Iran to produce nuclear weapons, they can do so very fast. Nod your head yes, Dan, if you're with me. You with me?
Okay. So I think Scott is very correct about that. The only thing I might possibly disagree just a little on is Scott's been saying that now for months. During those months, may it not be the case that Iran has already taken that step and that Iran is already a nuclear power? Okay, if it is a nuclear power, they would be highly secretive about that at this point. They would not be ready to announce it yet. So I'm saying, I think nobody really knows whether they're a nuclear power as yet, as of this time. But Scott's been talking about this since October. Okay, it's 2 months since October. They could have taken those few days over the period of 2 months. They've certainly figured out by now how to mount a nuclear weapon on one of their hypersonic missiles. I don't know whether they've done it yet, but I suspect they know how. Okay, and I think Scott would probably agree with that. Of course, I don't come here to talk, but I suspect he would agree they have the technical capability to mount it on one of their hypersonic missiles. And I think he previously said in other streams that they had enough of the uranium necessary for for 6 of the nuclear bombs. So they could be a nuclear power right now. Okay, so I just want to make that clear. What happens if Trump comes into office and they're a nuclear power right then? Well, we'll discuss that as we go forward. In other words, Scott's implicitly saying here, well, they could become a nuclear power in just a few days, but he's assuming they're not a nuclear power. And he's assuming that, I think he's assuming that when Trump comes into office, they won't be a nuclear power yet. And they'll be waiting to negotiate with Trump as to whether they take the final step to become a nuclear power or not. Well, we'll see the possibility of that in just a second as we go forward.
I think you are. You are now. Are you woken up the fact that Donald Trump actually had a plan to go to nuclear war with Iran when he was the president, and the situations that would have triggered that plan exist right now? Are you with me, Dan? Because if you're not, get the hell out of here.
Okay. So I think a lot of the situation right now is similar to when Trump, was president. Yes, Scott is right about that. He's thinking that all the relevant aspects are similar. What I'm thinking is that they're not entirely similar for these reasons. First of all, the Russians are far stronger right now than they were when Trump, was president. And therefore, when he undertakes something as a possible nuclear attack on Iran, he's got to take into account their possible response to that. Okay, and there can be a range of responses. Okay, I'll talk about this range shortly, but the point is there are a number of things that Russia can decide to do in that situation. I should give one of those things now, though. Of course, before that even occurs, Trump could receive a warning from Putin saying, don't you dare try that, and outlining possible consequences. Okay. Okay, so let us continue. That's one of the things that can happen. The other thing in the situation, which is vastly different, is Iran has a huge store of missiles and rockets and drones now, and they have hypersonic missiles. We don't have hypersonic missiles. They have hypersonic missiles. And whenever they see an attack coming on them, there's going to be no surprise. If an attack is launched against them, the Russians will immediately warn them. And they can launch their hypersonic missiles. And they can do tremendous damage with their hypersonic missiles and further ballistic missiles following their hypersonic missiles. I think Scott would agree with this. They can do tremendous damage. That's not like the situation was in 2020. It's 4 years down the road. The Iranians are far more powerful than they were in 2020, including, of course, their air defense is much better because they have S-400 systems now, as well as their own systems in the S-300 systems. And the performance of their systems, and Scott agrees with this because I heard his commentary at that time, he agrees with the general consensus, among many commentators, that the October 26th attack by the U.S. on Iran was very unsuccessful because their air defenses were too strong. Now, that their air defenses can be used not only against Israeli planes, but U.S. planes as well, and U.S. rockets and missiles, as well. In other words, it just doesn't only apply to Israel, it applies to U.S. attacking it as well. And the question is, Scott points out that there's a plan for attacking Iran, which was formulated during the first Trump administration. Well, that plan is 4 years outdated because the situation has changed in relevant respects, especially the defensive capability, that Iran has, but also in their capacity to retaliate. It should be clear, Trump, that there are 68 bases of the United States surrounding Iran. Those 68 bases are hostage to the Iranian missiles. Scott knows this. He's talked about this himself. He's not thinking about it now. Why is he not thinking about it? Because he is part of a group of commentators who drew conclusions from the fall of Syria that somehow the capability of Iran itself, well, the capability axis of resistance was somehow diminished. Well, I mean, sure, it took a hit. Sure, for the moment, the pathway from Iran to Hezbollah is gone. But the missile stocks of Hezbollah are intact. The rockets, the drones are intact. The estimated 150,000 stock of missiles, rockets, and drones that Hezbollah was supposed to have, okay, are intact. The missile stocks of Iran, which, I mean, they've got to be 10 times larger. The missile stocks of Hezbollah, missiles, rockets, drones, flying objects, were 150,000. I wouldn't be surprised if the missile stocks of Iran, the missile, rockets, drone stocks of Iran, are 10 times as great, 1.5 million. They have cities underground from which they fire missiles. That was not the situation 4 years ago, not quite the same situation. A different situation, maybe requiring an update to the plan, which is going to take some time, maybe requiring more caution from the United States. Not only are the 68 bases surrounding Iran hostage to that missile stock of the Iranians, but the aircraft carriers in West Asia are also hostage. They can all be targeted very easily by those missiles. And the hypersonic missiles can take out aircraft carriers. It's true, the Iranians don't have any of the Oreshniks yet, but they've got some missiles with pretty powerful payloads. And just 2 or 3 of those missiles can take out an aircraft carrier. And we have what, maybe 3 in the region? Those 3 aircraft carriers are hostage to the military capability of Iran. Scott's not really talking about that. But Trump's going to get advice from people. Hopefully, he'll even talk to Colonel McGregor. And if he talks to Colonel McGregor, he's going to get this kind of talk that I've been giving. Colonel McGregor will tell him about the risks of an attack by Iran, okay, by the United States. I'm going to go on now.
It's Danny's chat, so I can't control it. But come on, don't be stupid here. Don't be playing stupid games. Donald Trump has said he will not tolerate a nuclear Iran at all. He built a nuclear plan back when he was president before to prevent this from happening. The situation today is far different than it was when he was president before. Iran is on the cusp, but not me.
He said the situation is far different. He knows the situation is far different now. But he doesn't want to look at all the aspects in which they're far different. He wants to say that they're very similar in relation to the possibility that Trump is going to nuke Iran or decide to nuke Iran. I'm saying I don't know if they're similar in that respect for the reasons that I've given. Let me go on.
Saying it, several senior advisors to the supreme leader have said all we need is the political change, and they've also said that the fatwa can be reversed. Are you with me, Dan? The fatwa that says Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons can be reversed because of the changing environment which is happening as we speak. So if the supreme leader says yes to a nuclear bomb, Iran will have one within a week.
So what's one aspect of the changing environment which the Iranians might be paying close attention to? That aspect of the changing environment is that Donald Trump is about to become the president again. They know, just as Scott knows, that Donald Trump was talking about a nuking of Iran when he last was president. They know, as Scott knows, that he had a plan drawn up for the nuking of Iran. So the question is, What is Iran going to do about that now as we approach the presidency, okay, of Donald Trump? Now, we know there's a lot of infighting inside of Iran about what to do about that right now. Basically, the Pezeshkian crowd, the reformers in Iran, seem to want to negotiate with Trump, to wait for him to come in and then talk to him and hope that they can do some kind of deal. But there's a hardline faction that wants to take some other kind of action, and the two are divided. Now, so far, the Pezeshkian group seems to be, okay, in the ascendance. But will they remain so as they think about this particular situation? Will they remain so in light of what has just happened in Syria? I don't know, but I'm going to continue with the comments.
Donald Trump has said if that happens, he will blow them off the frickin' earth using nuclear weapons. A little bit of nuance there, right? So it's not as simple as you said. Am I overstating it? Hell no. I'm giving you the uncomfortable facts.
I completely agree with his uncomfortable facts. I just think his facts are incomplete in the ways that I've stated. I also acknowledge that he knows those facts. That is the facts I pointed to, even better than I know them, because nobody knows more about these various facts than Scott Ritter does.
Everything I just said is factual. Factual. Now, Donald Trump is looking for a better deal, but I think he'll probably do to Iran what he did with North Korea, where he started off with his fire and fury speech at the Security Council, if you remember that one. I will bring fire and fury down on you like you have never seen before, meaning nuclear weapons. And he turned around and said, but we can talk. So I have a feeling that Trump's.
Okay, now I completely agree with Scott about that also. I think Trump's going to do something like that because he always does something like that. That is his particular style. But when he does that, what's going to happen? The one thing is Putin's going to call him. I know the Iranians will agree to negotiate on, various things, but there are going to be a lot of factors, okay, that are going to develop in that particular situation. And those factors are going to take into account the changes in the balance of power in Europe and in West Asia and in East Asia that have occurred since that time that Trump may not be very familiar with. And I must say, I have a great fear that the advisors that he's been picking may not be very familiar with the possible exception of Tulsi Gabbard. But so far, the advisors he's picked are people who never met a war they didn't like. So that's not a good sign. We might be lucky, and a number of them may not be confirmed, and he may go looking around for other advisors, and maybe one or two will come to him, through the Judging Freedom program. Judge Napolitano was one of his advisors at some point. He has a degree of trust there. And I know he's got a degree of trust with Colonel McGregor also because he was one of his advisors. So he may get some people who will tell him the truth about changes in international politics. Let's hope so, because otherwise this could go very, very bad.
Going to come in a little bit fire and fury, saying, I got a nuclear war plan. I will take you out in a heartbeat. I won't even blink on this one. I won't even blink. It'll be done. But would you like to talk to me? And I hope that the Iranians say, yes, we'd like to talk, because at this point in time, whatever they thought they were going to accomplish with a nuclear weapon isn't going to be accomplished.
Okay. And I hope that one of the things that happens when he says, "Would you like to talk to me?" is a response from them saying, "We certainly would like to talk to you, and we would like these talks to include our good ally, the Russian government." In other words, this is not just going to be a two-way talk. We want to involve our Chinese friends and our Russian friends as well. That's going to create a different sort of negotiating situation. It's not going to be like the North Korean situation where Trump went to see Kim specifically, and it was just the two of them. I don't think the Iranians are going to go for just the two of us. That what they're going to go for, okay, is a broader group which would be dedicated to informing Trump of the changed facts in the international situation. Okay, let us go then, you and I.
And if everybody's like, well, go ahead and do it, and you'll be like North Korea. No. See, North Korea always had nuclear weapons. They just were looking to make them strategic. So North Korea always had the ability to threaten Seoul and Tokyo and all that. The moment the Iranians say we have nuclear weapons is the moment Iran disappears as a modern nation state, because Russia will, dogs going crazy. Russia will, United States will nuke it. And there are people say, well, Russia will put Iran under its nuclear umbrella. No, they won't. Russia's not going to.
Okay, there I have to disagree. And the reason why I have to disagree with Scott here is because Russian foreign policy is much broader than it was in 2020 and past years. The Russians are thoroughly immersed in BRICS and the Eurasian strategy, thoroughly immersed in their union with China and also with Iran, because Iran lies astride the new trade routes, which the Russians are tremendously interested, okay, in building. Okay, so Iran is not just some small client state that they're concerned to keep safe. It's a vital part of their future plans for economic um, 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 expansion and economic development. And it fits into the picture of the Belt and Road Initiative. It fits into the plan of building the economic power of the Eurasian states um, in the future. The whole geopolitical outlook of Russia is oriented towards the inclusion of Iran and oriented towards seeing to it that Iran survives and continues to develop. And I don't think that's something that Scott is, taking account of here. There are various things the Russians can do in responding to threats by Trump. As I've indicated before, first, they can educate him about the political realities, okay, these days, and the realities of power. Secondly, they don't have to threaten a nuclear war with the United States in response to a nuking of Iran. What they can say is that they're going to join with Iran in getting rid of all of the U.S. bases in West Asia and major U.S. bases in Western Europe also, and that they're not going to go nuclear to do it. They're going to use Oreshniks to do it. There are just various options that they could talk to Trump about, which would be very costly for the United States and make Trump think twice about whether Trump stopping Iran from getting, a nuclear weapon is really worth it. After all, Pakistan has such weapons. Israel also has such weapons. The reason why Iran would want to get such weapons, in fact, one reason why they want to get it, maybe the most important reason at this point, is to stop Israel from nuking them. Putin will point out that Iran is not going to use nuclear weapons on anyone, even if it has the nuclear weapons, unless they're attacked first by Israel, with nuclear weapons. So other people, not just his advisors, other people, the Russians, the Chinese, will be explaining to Trump why it's not so harmful for Iran to have a handful of nuclear weapons, because all they are is a deterrent, against Israel. And that the idea of nuking Iran is certainly not worth Iran's nuclear retaliation against Israel, which would be part of such an exchange. I mean, that kind of exchange, if it occurs after Trump takes office, Iran would be a nuclear power then, and they could certainly threaten Israel and say, well, if you do it to us, we're going to totally destroy Israel. And that would be a very credible threat. They can't directly threaten the United States yet because they don't have the strategic weapons, but they can certainly threaten to destroy Israel. It would take only 3 nuclear bombs to do it, and Iran would have those. And Iran could deliver them before our nuclear bombs could get to Iran. That's going to give Trump pause. That situation did not exist when he last was president. People are going to explain that to him. So I don't even know whether Russia has to say, if you nuke Iran, we're going to take out Boston. I don't even know if Russia has to threaten that. They can threaten other major consequences that will be enormously costly to the United States that Trump won't want to incur. And Trump, for his whole life, Trump always pushes things to the edge. He always pushes things to the edge. But when he's outgunned, he steps back. He always steps back when he's outgunned about something. That's part of the history of Trump, too. He's good at recognizing superior power when it exists. And the axis of resistance, supplemented by Russia and China, have superior power in West Asia to use against Trump. And they can stop him from nuking Iran, even if he initially thinks it's a good idea. So I don't agree with Scott necessarily on that. I have lots more to say about this, though. If we can ever get
Going to commit
buffering.
national suicide for Iran. So this is a very dangerous situation. Donald Trump is a very dangerous president in this regard. But this is real. I'm not making shit up. I'm not throwing facts out. I'm not, trying to say something. I'm just giving you the hard truth. If you can't handle the truth, you'll watch Jack Nicholson movie or something. But
I have to.
Okay, by the way, I'm giving you my version of the hard truth also. Okay, I'm not as knowledgeable about various things, okay, as Scott is, but I think that with respect to thinking about this particular situation, then I'm thinking more broadly than Scott is, at least thus far. So there it is. It's not that he doesn't have access to all these facts. He does, but he's not putting them into his hopper yet and coming out with another result. But let's go to the second question and the second answer, because that answer is overall going to be very important too.
Scott, just give Sparky, who asked about a half dozen questions, for you to quickly comment on this one since he's been so generous. Should Iran do the missile thing now to Israel or wait their fate because Iran is on the infamous list? This is more of your opinion because earlier you addressed this question on the basis of the situation that we find ourselves in real terms. But if, in your opinion, what do you think about this question?
No, look, to what end? To what end? To feel.
Okay, to what end? Here are the ends. First of all, a lot of Syria is now being destroyed by Israeli air power. Furthermore, if any groups are to emerge that threaten to put Syria back together, the Israelis are virtually promising that they're going to destroy those groups with their air power as they arise, that the Israelis will allow nothing but chaos to exist in Syria. Or as Jonathan Cook says, either they're going to allow a situation where the Syrians become basically vassals of the Israelis, the West Bank solution, or they're going to have a solution where there's always chaos. How will the chaos be created? Mainly by Israeli bombings, by Israeli air power. What are the ends, of an Iranian attack? In the past, a number of us, including Scott, have suggested that the Iranians could deliver a 2,000 missile attack, on Israel. And sometimes he's also said it might be 3,000 missiles. He doesn't really have a hard figure in mind. The basic idea is they have the capacity to deliver thousands of missiles to Israel at once. And they can send those missiles over in waves. The first missiles can be hypersonic missiles devoted to destroying the Israeli air defenses. That would be the first waves. The second wave, which would be following just a few minutes later, would be a wave that would be designed to knock out every single air base in Israel. Every single one. Make those air bases unusable. A third wave might be directed at other strategic targets. There are lots of strategic targets, inside of Israel. I suggest that kind of attack, by Iran, supplemented by coordinated attacks from Hezbollah, whose stocks are still there, and the Houthis, who are still in the process of firing missiles, at Israel. Just yesterday, there were 2 devastating attacks. So the Houthis would be involved in this too. The Iraqi resistance would also be involved in this too. I mean, altogether, there could be 3,000 or 4,000 missiles, shooting, at Israel. Let's seriously consider what would be the effects of that attack be. The Israelis don't have any deep tunnels underground where their air assets are. Their assets are in air bases above ground. The Israeli planes might have time to get into the air. Some of them might have time to get into the air. But only some of them. Many of the Israeli planes would be destroyed on the ground in such an attack. Those that were not destroyed on the ground would have nowhere to come home to. And they may be faced up in the air by opposition from the Iranians, whose air force is being strengthened continuously, and whose air defenses we now know are superior to the Israelis. The Iron Dome is being penetrated right and left by hypersonic missiles and by other missiles. It is ineffective right now. Here's the point, or one point. If one of the objectives of the Iranian attack might be to destroy the air capability of Israel for the foreseeable future, what does that mean? It means no air attacks against Iran. It means no air attacks against the Houthis. It means no air attacks, in Lebanon. It means no air attacks in Syria. It means the Israeli forces in Syria would be open to ground attacks. What happens if the Iranians throw 50,000 IRGC troops, throw them up into Iran in the short run? They'll sweep the Israelis out of their area, out of the area they're dominating in Syria right now. Those Israeli forces will be gone. They don't have 50,000 or anywhere near that number of Israeli troops in Syria right now. If that kind of missile attack by Iran is followed in a few days with an IRGC invasion of Syria, guess what? The path from Iran to Lebanon can be reestablished. Hezbollah can be resupplied. Israel will be on its knees, and that's another end to one end. That's another end of such an Iranian attack. If the Iranians follow that up with a public announcement that they're not interested in destroying Israel, but what they are insisting on is the ending of the occupation and the end of the genocide, the Iranians would have the political support of the whole world. And if the Iranians insisted that we're not looking for the destruction of Israel, we're looking for a two-state solution of the kind envisioned by the UN for many, many, many years, and we're insisting on that solution. We're ready to come to the table now to create that kind of solution. If Israel refuses to come to the table, we will proceed with further attacks until Israel is in total chaos. The Israelis must come to the table right now. There must be an international conference. The Russians must be there. The Chinese must be there. We will be there. The Gulf Arab states will have to be there also. The Palestinians will have to be there. The Israelis will have to be there. The United States will have to be there. These are the primary actors to create a new security framework for West Asia. The Iranians could tell people that is what we are interested in. They could do all this before Trump is president. This could happen before Trump is president. So to what end? To the ends I've just spoken about. That's what such an attack could accomplish. Okay, now I have to say that I'm not just talking about this from my point of view. Scott in the past, before the collapse of Syria, was plain enough in his pronouncements that Israel was on the verge of collapse. Its economy was in ruins. It was getting beaten by Hezbollah. Scott agreed that the missile capability of Iran was huge compared to the resources Israel had to stop it. So what am I saying today that Scott himself has not said or implied in the past? Why does he think that the fall of Syria stops that kind of missile attack from creating chaos in Israel? Why does he think that that kind of missile attack would not destroy the Israeli air capabilities, which are, by the way, the most powerful part of the IDF right now anyway? He himself thinks the ground capability of the IDF is a second-rate military force. He thinks Hezbollah is superior to the Israelis as a ground force. I'm sure he thinks the IRGC is superior to the Israelis as a ground force. I mean, I'll venture a guess about that, but I'm pretty sure he feels that way and thinks that way. The Israelis will lose any ground contest with the axis of resistance and other ground forces, okay, that would be arrayed against it. Now, if they had their air force in place, of course, they wouldn't lose it. But the Iranians would have destroyed their air force with their big missile attack. I mean, consider the sequence, that would be going on here. The Israelis would try to defend themselves, but I don't think they have the military capability to defend themselves in the absence of their air force. But what about the U.S. Air Force? I mean, what about our carriers? As I said before, our carriers and our air bases in that area are hostage to the Iranian missiles. If we intervene, the Iranians will loose their missiles on those air bases, and they have no defense against the hypersonic missiles. We don't know to what degree the Russians may help, but they have an ample supply of missiles to help the Iranians with. Before Trump comes in, I don't think there'd be a nuclear intervention by the United States. Far too problematic. By the time Trump gets in, there could be a totally different balance of power situation in West Asia than there appears to be now. The capability is there to turn the tables in a very, very short time. I can't tell you that the Iranians will do it. I think it's a question of courage and will, okay, on their part. So far, I'm not seeing that courage, okay, and will. But I know that the Supreme Leader is a very, very strong leader. And if he apprehends the situation correctly, he has more than sufficient, let's call it what it is, moral fiber, okay, to decide that what he must do is to try to overturn the balance of power in Syria. Because I don't think Iran can afford to have a Syria in chaos. It's got to have a Syria that's not a feeding ground and a trading ground for the Sunni terrorists. It's got to get rid of that. It's got to have a Syria that is neutral between itself and Turkey. Its own national interests, okay, are involved in this. It's got to have a Syria that allows it to resupply Hezbollah. It needs all these things. It can't allow the Jonathan Cook scenario in Syria. That is against the strong national interest, okay, of Iran. That is enough to get Iran to fight, I believe. I'm going forward now.
Feel good, to make us feel good. All the people that don't like Israel out there, who view Israel as a genocidal, Zionist, crazy, maniacal thing, we feel good for a moment. We cheer. We go, oh my God, look. But the big dog is coming into the neighborhood. Okay. The United States is not going to be ruled by a senile old man anymore. And we're not going to be ruled by a cackling hyena DEI candidate who the Democrats put out there. We're going to be ruled by a crazy white guy who is willing to go to extremes to do what he wants. Iran will not defeat Israel with a single strike or multiple. And if they do, Iran will be inviting decapitation as soon as Trump becomes president.
Okay, so I do agree that's going to be in the thought processes, okay, of Donald Trump. But there are going to be these other factors I talked about. Unlike the Biden administration, the Trump administration is going to be in communication with Putin and in communication with Iran. And it's going to be getting other information, okay, and other messages. And it's going to be brought into confrontation with the facts of what the real power is on the ground in West Asia. And I think that is going to change Trump's mind about whether it's a good idea to try to nuke Iran. I mean, he may think that the worst possible thing that could happen was be to have Iran as a nuclear power. I think Putin can convince him that is not the worst possible thing, and it's not something that he ought to risk a nuclear war over. I think Putin will argue that Trump needs to accommodate himself to the realities of power in 2024 and going forward. And I think Trump is good at accommodating himself to the realities of power. I think he's better at that than Biden and Blinken and Jake Sullivan and all of the frickin' idiots that there were in this administration. I think he can recognize when he's outmanned and outclassed. And I think Russia and Iran and China will make it clear to him before any attack that he is outmanned and outclassed. And by the way, if there is an attack by Iran first in the next couple of weeks, before the end of the year, of the kind I've talked about, that's going to establish new facts on the ground, power factors that Trump will have to take into account. If he wants to nuke Iran, he won't have the support of Israel because the Air Force will be destroyed. If he wants to nuke Iran, there may be no support from Israeli nukes because they might not have the delivery vehicle to deliver them. If he wants to nuke Iran, it's possible the air defense of Iran is going to stop him. It's possible they won't be able to deliver too many of the gravity bombs from the B-52s coming from, Diego Garcia. I know about the Polaris subs, okay, as well, and the Tridents. Okay, I know about those. And those may be decisive in such a situation, but at the same time, Trump has a lot of stuff to think about. He will be given a lot of stuff to think about. And he won't have a sure thing. Okay, it will be a dangerous gamble. And he can't be sure that Russia will not respond with hypersonic nukes, taking out some of the key cities here in the United States. You can't be sure about that. Now, I know Scott thinks that Putin won't go to nuclear war over Iran. But he wouldn't be going to nuclear war over Iran. He would be going to nuclear war over the future of BRICS. That's what the issue would be for Putin. For China, they might be willing to risk a nuclear war because 40% of their oil comes from Iran. They're dependent on Iran as a supplier of oil. The issues and the values at stake in this are great enough to have all the powers sit down and work out a peaceful solution with no nuking of anybody, and without Iran having to give up its nukes, which I assume by then they will have. Trump's going to have to back off. There's too much power in his way, and in assessing the realities of power, he's going to be much better at that than Biden and Jake Sullivan and Tony Blinken were. And I don't think he's going to have the same kind of arrogance. I know he's tremendously arrogant about all sorts of things, but only certain types of things, not other types of things. He's got a pretty good sense of danger, of when he's in danger.
If I'm the Iranian president, I've been, if I'm the supreme leader, the principal goal over the course of the last 30 years has not been the defeat of Israel. Yes, Iran is there with the actions of resistance to support Palestinian cause, but the principal goal has been to lift sanctions and have normalized economic relations with the world so that Iran, this nation that has tremendous wealth, can have the citizens benefit from this wealth. Right now, the Iranian citizens, it's a tough life. Sanctions have hurt hard. They should be living a better lifestyle than they are right now. And so the goal of the Iranian nation isn't existential struggle with Israel. It's to have a revived economy. And if I were the Iranian president, that would be the direction I'd be going. Whatever policies that could be implemented that lead to the normalization of relations. What leader wants his nation to exist under sanctions and the people suffering? No sane leader wants that. And no nation wants a leader who says that's what we're going to get. The Iranian government survives in the face of sanctions because it can easily be laid on the porch of, the people who impose it. It's their fault, not our fault. We didn't withdraw from the JCPOA. Trump did. The European Union failed to comply with all this kind of stuff. But if you turn around and say, screw it, hit Israel with everything we got right now. Why? And the consequences will be devastating for Iran. So if I were the Iranian leadership, I would say, hell no, let's find a negotiated path. You always have those missiles in reserve. You can always bring them out if need be, but you need to exhaust every venue possible short of war before you go to war. And right now, negotiations with the United States appears to be on the table. You know,
Okay, well, that piece there is the best argument that Scott has, okay, I think. But what it neglects is that the Ayatollah Khamenei is the leader, okay, of Shiism at this point. He's the leader of all of the Shiites, okay, of the world. That segment, okay, of Islam. He has a situation now where the existence of the Shiites, okay, in Syria is threatened by the anarchy there and by the Sunni terrorists who have taken over the government there. That's another thing about the present state of Syria that he cannot tolerate, okay, or allow, that he won't want to, but to allow. Furthermore, if the situation in Syria is not reversed, if there's not a situation that allows national leaders to emerge and create, okay, a Syrian nation that at least is neutral with respect to Iran, then the Ayatollah also faces the coming extinction of Shiism, okay, in Lebanon, because the Israelis will launch that two-front attack I was talking about earlier. That will be in the offing unless the Israelis are driven out of Syria. The Israelis cannot be driven out of Syria unless their air power is destroyed. The objective of hitting Israel with 3,000 missiles right now would be to destroy the Israeli air power, to make it a nullity. That would make it impossible for the Israelis to stay in Syria if there were an IRGC ground attack that would be hitting them, okay, in Syria, supplemented, of course, by Hezbollah ground troops. The Israelis would not then be able to stay in Syria. They would have to retreat back to Israel, which, by the way, would be in considerable chaos anyway, and where they would be needed to defend Israel. So that argues for Iran hitting them right now and negotiating with Trump later once he comes into office. And the idea, well, Iran can simply wait and use its missile capability at a later time. That doesn't necessarily apply.
I've consistently called myself, anti.
Okay, because if Trump comes into office and decides that he's going to nuke Iran, okay, and he does that quickly, and he does that fast, then he'll be delivering the gravity bombs and the nuclear weapons that can reach the underground missile capability, okay, of Iran. So I argue, okay, that what Iran has to do now is to use its missile capability before such an attack to take out the Israeli air capability and to drive Israel into chaos so that it is ready to sit down and negotiate a peace. I don't think Iran can count on its missile capability at some later time. Yes, it can count on doing damage because it will have advance warning of the attack and it can fire its missiles, okay, at that time. But those missiles won't have the same effect at that time because the gravity bombs will be hitting and they will be reducing the capability of Iran to reply. So I think there's an argument, okay, for Iran to hitting Israel right now, trying to knock out its air capability and following up with an IRGC attack, okay, on Syria. That would at least secure a part of Syria for the Shiites, okay, and Iran. Such an attack might also take out some of the U.S. bases. It would create a whole big crisis, certainly, and it would bring people to the table. And that's what we need at this point. We need people coming to the table. We need people talking sense. We need people settling things so that Syria once again becomes a state that can serve as a buffer. That is what we need. And I think that the conditions for that can be created by a successful Iranian attack right now. Going on.
War. I've also been called a militarist son of a bitch by many people. Look, I don't shy from a fight, and if you want to have an existential fight, let's have an existential fight, and I will fight to win. I don't make any apologies about that. If you want a war with America, you're going to lose because we're going to beat you, because we're not going to just roll over and play dead. But I don't want that kind of war. I've always said we have to exhaust every venue possible short of war before we go to war, so that we honor the sacrifice we're asking people to make in support of this cause. It has to be a cause worthy of that death. And you have to make sure that there's other ways besides violence to achieve what you want to achieve. It would sort of be a double standard of me now if I didn't apply that same logic to Iran.
That's true. But from the standpoint, okay, of Iran and the supreme leader, if such an attack would have the effect of securing the lives of the Shiites in Syria, and also later saving the Shiites in Lebanon, then those would be very important goals for the leader of Shiism. And I think that's what Scott is not taking into account here. Yes, I think the Iranians are desperate for normalization of the economy. They're desperate for better life for their people. But I don't think they're willing to sell out the other Shiites, the rest of Shiism, to have that life right now this year. I think they'll want to secure the security of the other Shiites first. They'll want to have a new security framework that will mean a better situation for all of the people inside of West Asia who are now in ruinous conflict. I think that means something to the Ayatollah. I think it means something to the right-wingers, in Iran, that they have other values apart from simply the material values that Scott is talking about right now. And I think in assessing the situation, he has to take those values into account.
For people saying, well, no, we need True Promise 3. Hit them. No. If you believe in avoiding wars, then you have to believe in avoiding wars, even if the target is a genocidal, maniacal regime called Israel. I don't think that Iran benefits from launching a major missile attack against Israel at this point in time. I think it would be to the detriment of Iran, and therefore irresponsible policy on the part of the Iranian leadership. There is a path to peace that could be found. Doesn't mean it will be found. Doesn't mean at some point in the future Iran will have no choice. But there's a path to peace that could be found, and I think it's worth giving that a chance.
Okay, I agree with Scott. There's a path to peace that would secure the continued existence of Iran and the development, of Iran. But that path to peace would be at the price of continuing to allow the Israelis to move towards the greater Israel that they have in mind. It would also involve the price of allowing Israel to continue and to complete the genocide, in Gaza. It would also allow the Israelis to continue to create the chaos which now exists, in Syria. It would also involve the price of allowing Hezbollah and Shiism to fall in Lebanon. I don't think, that Iran is prepared to pay that kind of price simply for its own security.
Israel is already talking about wanting to hit Iran.
They are. They are. They're talking about it now. And they may hit Iran first. And that's another consideration for Iran at this point. It would be important to beat them to the punch, to destroy their air power before they can have an effect on Iran. Now, I think Iran can turn aside any air attack by the Israelis. I don't think if it's a conventional attack, I don't think that would work. But on the other hand, if the Israelis come at Iran with a nuclear attack at this point, is Iran really ready for that? They could devastate Israel in reply when they see that attack actually coming. Okay. But if they take a nuclear blow, that's going to be small consolation for them. So I think the Iranians have every incentive at this point to destroy Israel's air capability first. And I don't think Scott is thinking clearly about that possibility. How many air
No, he's
bases
not.
are there? How many air bases are there, in Israel? Major air bases out of which those planes fly. 6? Those 6 air bases, and that's off the top of my head. Maybe there are more than 6, maybe there are 9. But whether there are 6 or there are 9 is not a material difference. Those Iranian missiles can devastate every single Israeli air base so that the Israeli air power is gone. And
Well, that has to be done.
that means Israel has to come to the table and has to settle.
Right. It's been too long. I mean, Israel has not been stopped. They won't listen to international law. They won't listen to anyone. The US is complicit in all of this as well. The UK is complicit in it. Germany's complicit in it. They're complicit in what Israel is doing. Israel has to be stopped.
And the only ones who can stop them at this point, who might have the will to stop them and the incentive to stop them, is Iran. Because the Israelis are threatening the whole Shiite crescent right now. And the whole axis, of resistance. I don't think the Iranians can allow that or give the Israelis the opportunity to destroy that. I mean, that takeover in Syria, the Israeli invasion of Syria, is a serious threat to the Shiites. It's not a serious threat to Iran yet, though it has some implications there also because because Israel can now use Syrian airspace in order to launch attacks, on Iran. But the worst thing is that the Israeli control over those areas of Syria means that the Shiites, over a period of time, are going to be exterminated. Iran can't allow that to happen. Okay, anyway, more comments, D.
You're absolutely right. You can't allow this to happen. This concept of being allowed to exterminate people. I mean, we look back at history, how Hitler was stopped. Netanyahu, Israel is in that same position.
Yes,
Netanyahu, this has been going on for 14 months now, but even not just 14 months, it goes back
it goes
to
back
the
and back and back. It's gone on for
this
nearly
is the
3 decades now.
exactly. And there's never enough territory. They're not happy with whatever territory they have. And it's that whole greater Israel notion. And they've said it over and over again. Finally, it's been taken seriously because they are serious about it.
Okay,
But
so did I make the case?
I believe so. But it has to be done because something when Trump comes in, you don't know whether he's going to listen to Putin or not. He's got his religious right group there s- screaming biblical stuff with Israel. I mean, you know, Iran has to think of itself. Plus, it has to think of the whole area. Look at what's happened to Gaza. No one's stopping Israel from doing what's. I mean, we know that Yemen. You look at Hezbollah trying to do what they can to stop Israel, but Israel has to be stopped. The U.S. is complicit in all this,
Yes.
and that's the problem. If the U.S. could have stopped it, Biden could have stopped it early on. But Biden chose not to, and I think a lot of it has to do with Blinken, but they chose not to.
Yeah, I mean, he can still stop it. He can stop
Mhm.
the shipment of arms to Israel right now, but he won't.
Oh, Friar Steve, Russia was the one that stopped Hitler.
Yes. Yes, Russia was the main factor in stopping Hitler. There's no question about that. Okay.
Hezbollah,
And
that
Iran
claim, but
will be the main factor in stopping this version of Hitler.
exactly. Now, Fry, you keep the Western media and there's people and there's other media saying about Hezbollah is done. I don't believe so.
Okay. I don't think their missile and rocket capability has been defrayed at all. It's still there. It's uh, uh, in full bloom. They couldn't have used more than, I don't know, 5,000 of their total stock in all this time. I mean, they've still got 140, 145,000 left to fire. So
Exactly. And it's time and place for everything.
there's a time and place for everything. And if Iran does reply to Israel, I think Hezbollah is just going to join in.
Hmm.
And if Iran follows up with the IRGC, I think the Israelis will be cleaned out of Syria. And that will end the ground threat
Hmm.
to Hezbollah.
Hmm.
In fact, Hezbollah will join in with cleaning the Israelis out of Syria.
Yes.
And their troops are very, very effective. I'm sure they have more than 100,000 troops to throw in there if it becomes a matter of throwing the Israelis out of Syria. And the Israeli army is practically exhausted anyway. I mean, it's not going to be an effective fighting force at this time. The IDF Air Force is effective. Like the IAF is effective, but the IDF is not effective anymore. If it meets any considerable opposition, it's going to lose. Anyway, those are a serious argument for the Iranian reply to Israel at this point before Trump comes back to office. That puts the Iranians in a strong position to negotiate with Trump when he gets back in. If they go ahead, okay, and develop, their 6 atomic devices, if they have not already, and I wouldn't be surprised if they have already, but if they go ahead and develop them in just a few days, as Scott says, they will be ready for Trump also. Of course, they won't be able to hit here, but they will be able to destroy Israel. And Trump would have to contend with that. And he can explain to his donors. He can say, look, they've got 6 nukes. We can't stop them because they've destroyed the Israeli defense capability and the Israeli Air Force. Only 3 are necessary to destroy the whole of Israel. Do you really want the whole of Israel to be destroyed at this point? Or would you rather I negotiate with them and make a peace agreement that saves Israel? I think Miriam Adelson is going to decide that they better make a peace agreement. I think in the end, his donors will do the sensible thing. Because while I think his donors are way off in left field somewhere, I don't think all of his donors are insane people. So there's that also. Okay, so there are still comments to consider. Shall we go consider the comments?
Yes, let's consider the comments.
Okay, let's see what people are saying. Okay. Oh, God, there are a lot of comments here. Going back. Okay, Friar Steve says Taiwan is sovereign and will outlast the Communist Party in mainland China. USA will ensure security of sea routes and our allies in that region. I'm sorry, Friar Steve. Okay, I think you're joking. Friar Steve says Scott Ritter is a joke, wasn't taken seriously by troops when he was in command. He wasn't in command of troops. He was a weapons inspector. He was a weapons inspector. U.S. will not nuke Iran. Well, I mean, Trump has threatened to do that. Lisa says, hi, folks. And Dolores says, K. Clark, Ryan, good to see you again. Friar Steve says, Iran will get a nuke because Trump, his policy toward Iran 2016-2020 helped Iran. Evelina says, helped unintentionally. Trump is an irrational actor. Trump doesn't know history nor geopolitics. No one knows what Trump will do tomorrow, including Trump. Well, there's a lot of truth to that, Friar Steve. Monadel says, hi, Lisa. Putin will never be able to set foot in Europe or any Western country again. Well, watch out because Biden might not be able to set foot in various areas of East and West again himself, because there may be charges coming for Biden and Blinken and Sullivan. So don't count on anything for our Steve. Evelina says, Richard Medhurst. Steve says, hi, Lisa. Evelina says, neither will Israel PM. Yep, Netanyahu. Well, I have to go to bed. Steve Wolfbrand says, good night, everybody. Friar Steve says, would love to see where Scott Ritter gets his funding. He gets his funding from people who contribute to his streams. He's got a very, very large audience, and they donate. And that's where he gets his funding. And that's the only place he gets his funding. Evelina says, China testing hypersonic commercial transport. I know. I saw that. That's incredible. Feisty says, you have no idea of U.S. capability. Iran government will come to an end if they attack U.S. bases. No, they don't have any defense against the hypersonic missiles, Friar Steve. Don't have any. U.S. helps Kurds in Iran to gain independence. Iran will be in real trouble. Well, the only way U.S. can help the Kurds in Iran to gain independence is to have a fight with Turkey. Turkey's got 500,000 troops. How many troops does the U.S. have in Syria? I mean, how many have we got in all the bases? In the 68 bases, we've got something like 40,000 military personnel. I mean, the Turks could destroy them with spit. Friar Steve says, Iran army can't put boots on the ground. U.S. only needs to support the Kurds in Iran. They can't put boots on the ground. Why not? I mean, they put boots on the ground when they fought Iraq. There was no problem with boots on the ground now, and they're far stronger and far larger then. I believe they have an army. I don't know if the IRGC has an army this large, but the IRGC plus the regular army troops of Iran, they're over 1 million men there. I mean, that's a big army. Space transportation is working on supersonic, a long way to go. We're not talking about supersonic, Fire Steve. We're talking about hypersonic. The Russian Sarmat missile runs at between Mach 20 and Mach 27. Now, do you understand how fast that is? Mach 27 is 35,000 miles per hour. Got that, Friar Steve? Lana says, we may come to rue that Iran got involved in this mess. We may come to rue the day we involved Iran in this mess. Friar Steve, I wouldn't underestimate China if I were you. Evelina, well, don't overestimate the CPC. It's not a question of the CPC. It's a question of the Chinese military, the Chinese army. That's not the CPC. It's another very large army, 2 or 3 million men. Evelina Pont, USA should treat CPC China like Cuba. Oh, come on. No country in Europe has U.S. bases against their will. When Iran uses nuke, that regime will see its demise. I don't think Iran is going to use nukes. I think it's just going to get nukes to deter Israel. That's all. Friar Steve says, laugh out loud. Russia hit Boston at the cost of St. Petersburg and Moscow. Friar Steve, I don't think you understand anything about the hypersonic missiles. I think you got to do some research. Steve, Cuba, by the way, is a small nation of 11 million people and no threat to the U.S. It's unfriendly and cowardly to block a neighbor. China has a huge population, 1.4 million people, billion people, Friar Steve, and very far away. No comparison there. It's very hard for us to project our power towards China. Friar Steve. Evelina Pont, well, you're ignoring history. Castro allowed Russian nukes in our region, so they brought that pain on their people. No, they didn't. In other words, there was no reason why the United States continued sanctions on Cuba beyond, let's say, 1970. It was all over by then. We were getting increasingly close to peace with the Russians by then. We just have the Cuban refugees in Florida, and they developed a political base in Florida. And that political base got them power in Congress. And the reason why those sanctions are there is because it's politically unpalatable to get rid of the sanctions on Cuba. That's the whole story. That's what it's about. There's no rationale to sanctioning Cuba any longer. There's certainly no threat to the United States. Israel is working to have peace with HTS. Israel won't have a peace with HTS because HTS is a bunch of head choppers. That attack by Israel is fantasy. Hezbollah is out of the fight. Well, that remains to be seen. Friar Steve, U.S. intention to invade might have had something to do with. Anyway, how long were the missiles there? Once the Russians negotiated removal of missile base in Turkey, the missiles in Cuba were retrieved. Yes, they were. They were. No, Doc, you're 100% wrong. Hezbollah won't even answer their phones, laugh out loud. Besides, that was more than 40 years ago. No, that was more than that was more than 60 years ago, Evelina. 60 years ago. It was the Cuban Missile Crisis was in 1961. It's now 2024. Lana says, who's going to call this meeting? The Russians and Chinese will call the meeting, and the Iranians. I applaud the idea, just not sure where or how this will happen. It can happen at the UN. The UN can offer its good offices. Far as Israel is winning, clearly you neither got the memo nor have you been paying attention. None of what you are claiming will happen. The Israelis lost in Lebanon. That's why they negotiated a ceasefire. They were getting their clock cleaned on the ground, in Lebanon. They were not winning. They were destroying a lot of people with their air power. Is Israel still on the verge of collapse? They seem to be still standing. No, they're still on the verge of the collapse. They're on the verge of economic collapse. They still can't get their shipments through. Their economy is in shambles. Sure, they're still fighting. Their army is still there. It's still intact. It can march into Syria when there's no force that's opposing them in Syria. Their air force can still operate because it's being supplied by the United States every day. Fries Evelina Pontoff lesson. There were no missiles in Turkey. Pretty sure only anti-missile tech in Turkey. What are you talking about? There were Jupiter missiles in Turkey. Don't you know any history? In the 1960s, there were Jupiter IRBMs, in Turkey. And they were pointed at Moscow. And they could reach Moscow in a very, very short time. That's why the Russians moved their missiles into Cuba, to create a symmetrical situation. There were no Patriots in existence at that time. Doc, nothing is changing in 2 months in that region. Your assessment is flawed. By February 1st, 2000, it will be the same. Iran can't sustain an armed conflict against Western powers. Well, I'm not even going to reply to that. I certainly disagree. I would point out to you the Western powers have no troops to put into West Asia. The total number of troops in the U.S. Army right now is about 450,000. That's all. That's all. That's not as many troops as the Turks have. Evelina Ponte Yup and NK was 70 years ago. Both deserve what they get, can't hate on U.S., then want to trade with U.S. and allies. Doc, Israel is winning. Doc, you are wrong. Why can't Russia destroy every Ukrainian airbase? It can destroy, every Ukrainian airbase. You overhype hypersonic missiles, show proof you can't. It was stopped by U.S. Without U.S., Russia would have lost. Okay, how many Germans do you think were killed by the United States in World War II, Friar Steve? And how many Germans were killed by the Russians in World War II? Have you any idea what those particular ratios were? Now, without the U.S., it's true Russia might have lost, but that was because of the Lend-Lease program at the start of the war, which was able to keep Russia fighting. It wasn't because, of our later invasion. Certainly that had something to do with it, but the main work in World War II was done by the Russians. Everybody knows that, Friar Steve. That is common knowledge. Hezbollah is done, D. No, Hezbollah is not done. There is a ceasefire in place now. So Hezbollah, has not been attacking. But the Israelis have been violating the ceasefire, and they have plenty of justification to come back at any moment. And if the Iranians attack, you will see 500 Hezbollah missiles flowing into Israel that very same night. Remember what I just said, because that's what will happen. Evelina says the U.S. public can greatly benefit from lifting sanctions on a country with innovative medical research and drugs they don't have in the U.S. Yes, Evelina. Russia was losing until we came into the war. Can't rewrite history. Russia was losing until we came into the war, but that doesn't mean we won the war. That means we helped them, and we did. Israel ended Hezbollah. Unsure how you've missed all that. Lebanese government is making peace accord with Israel. No, they're not. There's just a ceasefire. Yours isn't a valid reason either. When the U.S. revived relations with Vietnam years ago, and what about Japan? Friar Steve, all his donors are insane people. Zionists won't bow to Iran. Stop playing, laugh out loud. If Turks attack a NATO partner, that would mean Turkey kicked out of NATO and all NATO against Turkey. Turkey has one foot in BRICS. It can afford to tell NATO to go to hell. It wasn't let into the EU anyway. After years and years and years of trying, the EU welched on Turkey. Friar Steve says, when the regime in Cuba ends, so will the sanctions. Evelina says, yes, I corrected that 60 years ago. Yeah, I didn't see your comment, Evelina. I was trying to tell Friar Steve Cuban Missile Crisis was a long time ago. Yes. And he said, yes, Jupiter, I stand corrected. Yeah, there's a big difference between Jupiter missiles and the Patriot missiles. The Patriot missiles are tactical. The Jupiter missiles were strategic. One more time before you sign out, remind the audience that Willie Bragg, also known as Dirtbag Leftist, is planning to host a healthcare discussion with Dave Garibaldi and I on Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern on his channel. Right, so go to Willie Bragg's channel, on YouTube, and you will see the healthcare discussion at 6 p.m. Eastern. Friar Steve, let's talk in February 2025. Be happy to talk, Friar Steve. YouTube channel, I hope you will join us in the chat. Thanks. Okay, Dot, let's see if what you say. Now, wait, hold everything, Friar Steve. Let's be clear. I didn't say that Iran was going to decide to take the action that I think it should. Those things that I predicted are predicted conditional on the Iranian attack. If the Iranians do not decide, okay, to attack, I am not responsible for what is likely to happen to them. If they miss this opportunity, it's going to cost them. It's going to cost them very big. D, any further comments?
No, I think you've covered it all.
Okay, so on that note, I think I'm going to say good night. I did what I wanted to do. Have you any idea why our audience was so small tonight?
I forgot to share on X till later.
Still, that doesn't, I don't think that explains it.
I don't know. From what I understand, audiences pretty much have been lower.
Yeah, probably Christmas shopping and things like that.
Yeah.
Probably have to do with that. Turkey will never be in the EU, but Turkey can't defeat NATO. Turkey doesn't have to defeat NATO. But for your information, Turkey has the biggest army in NATO. There's a policy in NATO charter to deal with such an attack on a NATO partner by a NATO partner. Well, policies are all well and good, but you need armies to back them up. And the question is whether all the rest of NATO has an army the size of Turkey. If you include the US, yes, of course it does. Okay, but we're already assuming the US is going to be preoccupied elsewhere, right? The question is whether the rest of NATO, other than the US, could put together an army the size of Turkey. I don't think they can. Just saying. Anyway, good night, everybody. Good night, Friar Steve. Friar Steve says happy solstice, and he's right
Happy
about
solstice.
it. It is the solstice. Happy
Yeah.
solstice. Do we have any solstice rituals that we want? Okay, good night, folks.
And good night, Bonnie.
Have a great night. And good night, Dee. Thank you for coming.
Yes. And thank you for having me. Good night, everyone.
And thank you, everybody, for coming. I will be back on Tuesday. Dee may be back tomorrow night. Is that so, Dee?
I'm not too sure. I'll have to see.
Okay, but tomorrow or Monday, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so look for us. Look for notifications. We will be around. I expect to have a show on Tuesday, even though it's Christmas Eve. At least I expect it now, but maybe I won't. Maybe I'll crap out because it's Christmas Eve. But anyway, if I don't see you before Christmas, then everybody have a Merry Christmas or a Happy Holiday if you don't celebrate Christmas.
Yes.
And
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays. Happy, happy, happy times, right? Whatever you
yes,
celebrate, have a good time.
right. Happy Kwanzaa.
Yes.
Summer solstice below the equator. South American good night. That's right. It is the summer solstice. Aren't you folks lucky this time of year?
Exactly right.
Well, we have this miserable weather here.
Hmm.
Friar Steve says, bye, Ev. And Lana says, merry and happy and healthy wishes. Thank you, Lana.
Hmm.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Yes. Good night.